Think for a second. You are watching this video, hearing your thoughts, feeling alive. It feels as if there is someone inside you, an observer, a commander, the main character. But what if it's all an illusion? What if our perception is merely a virtuoso trick of evolution, a spectacle without an audience? Everything we know, feel, and experience comes to us through the prism of consciousness. How can one doubt that they exist? However, modern physics, closely allied with neurobiology, is painting a disturbing picture. Consciousness may not exist in the way we understand it. And even more frightening, it might not belong to us at all. Recent research is astonishing. Despite some difficulty, it is no longer a secret that thoughts can arise before we even become aware of them. Identity can bifurcate when the brain is severed. Quantum processes influence our internal experience. And some scientists now assert that consciousness is not a property of the brain, but something much grander, which cannot be described by the current laws of physics. So what is our self? Why have leading physicists started to claim that everything is not as previously assumed? Why do the paradoxes of consciousness baffle even quantum mechanics? We tend to think of consciousness as something hidden in our brain, like an invisible conductor managing our thoughts and decisions. But the trouble is, scientists have been searching for this conductor for decades, all in vain. Despite astonishing brain visualization technologies, no section of the brain has been recognized as the center of consciousness. Yes, we can observe activity in certain areas of the brain, for example, when a person solves an equation or remembers the face of a loved one. But the observer, the one who is aware of all this, has not been found. Particularly unsettling are cases with patients who have undergone surgery to cut the corpus callosum, the connection between the two hemispheres of the brain. After this operation, some patients begin to behave as if there are two different people within their bodies. One hand puts on a shirt while the other tears it off. One eye sees, the other refuses to see. Each hemisphere has its own will and perception. If consciousness is localized and singular, how can one explain the phenomenon of split personality? But that's not all. There are patients with nearly completely destroyed neocortex, the outer layer of the brain. Yet they still exhibit signs of consciousness, emotions, and even basic logic. In other words, a person deprived of brain areas believed to ensure consciousness remains themselves. But let's delve further. Artificial neural networks, devoid of subjectivity, can recognize speech, translate languages, and recognize emotions on faces. However, no algorithm is aware of its actions. It is merely imitation, not consciousness. So what makes the brain conscious? Where is the line between machine reaction and living self? Modern physiologists propose that consciousness is not something localized in the brain, but a dynamic state of the entire brain. It arises when information flashes across the system and becomes available to all its parts. But this does not explain why this information is felt by someone. Consciousness cannot be confined to a single area of the brain. It wanders like a ghost among neurons, arising not from somewhere specific, but from everywhere and nowhere at once. Imagine you played the lead role all your life, only to find out that the main character never existed. We are used to thinking that consciousness is hidden in our brain and that we control ourselves. But it turns out that there is no center, no observer in the brain. Everything we perceive as self is likely just an illusion created by our perception. In Buddhism, there is a concept of anatta, the absence of self. But when physicists and neurobiologists reach the same conclusions, it raises the suggestion that most people have been misled for too long. A pertinent question arises. Who is hearing the inner voice if there is no speaker? A series of experiments have shown that consciousness can easily confuse its own body with that of another person. For example, a person starts to feel a stranger's hand as their own. But if consciousness can so easily confuse its body, how can we trust our sense of self? Let's turn to the hypothesis of Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. They proposed that consciousness arises not in neurons, but in microtubules inside cells where quantum processes occur. This hypothesis suggests that consciousness does not merely emerge, it collapses like a probability wave. What if personality is no more than a flash of quantum information? And what if consciousness is not a property of the brain, but a non-local phenomenon that exists in different places simultaneously, connecting events and states in a strange mystical web? Penrose and Hameroff found that quantum processes in neurons create quantum entanglements. What if part of your consciousness could be instantly connected to another part of the universe without signal transmission? In other words, a thought is not merely a flash in the head, but a non-local phenomenon distributed throughout reality. What if all consciousnesses are parts of a single whole consciousness, and like fragments of a hologram, even individually contain the full picture? Imagine that you, I, and millions of people on Earth are one consciousness, divided into many fragments but interconnected. This utterly undermines our idea of a fixed self. There is no center. Instead, there is a unified quantum entangled consciousness that simply unfolds in the form of each of us. Thus, consciousness is not a product of the brain, but an all-pervasive structure of reality itself. And our brain merely temporarily activates, like a light bulb in an infinite power grid. Science has approached the idea that consciousness may be embedded in the fabric of reality, like energy, space, or time. And none of this is merely theory. These are scientific experiments increasingly confirming this hypothesis. Perhaps we do not so much think as navigate fixed states of consciousness, thereby creating the illusion of thought. Moreover, in quantum physics, there exists a hypothesis of retrocausality, stating that the future may influence the past. This makes cause and effect relationships bidirectional and shatters our familiar logic. But if there is no time and thought is merely an illusion, does that mean that the I who thinks is just a phantom? Whatever our feelings about this, it is possible that we are all shadows in the mirror of eternity, and our lives are merely the illusion of movement in a unified field. When you lie under anesthesia or lose consciousness, where is it all this time? When you wake up, you feel like the same person again, even if the brain was inactive. What if consciousness is not lost, but merely shifts to another state? These questions challenge all our concepts of consciousness and who we are. Modern science increasingly converges on one thing: we do not understand what consciousness is. Thoughts may not arise in the brain, but merely be perceived. Quantum entanglement hints at the non-local nature of perception. Consciousness may be part of reality itself, and the time as we perceive it may not exist. This implies that our thought process and even our memory could be mere illusions. Consciousness can be switched off, but that does not mean it disappears. Perhaps it transcends what we can observe. The further science advances, the clearer it becomes that we are facing something that cannot be fully understood, and that something is our own consciousness.